My little sister started waking up every morning with scratches on her face. Initially, we presumed that she was doing it to herself, maybe in her sleep. However, we soon realised that this wasn't the case, because the scratches started appearing in the middle of her back, places she couldn't possibly have reached by herself. My mum would bath my sister on the evening, and by the morning the scratches would appear. Watch this video until the end to find out what happened to this little girl and her family that was so terrifying they had to leave their own home. I'm your host, Severed Soul. Before my parents got divorced, my mum and I lived in Mexico with my dad and my grandparents. I really have no idea how old this place was. From what I know, my grandpa's family has owned the land of this huge area of the city for generations. It used to be a hacienda before they started splitting up the land amongst themselves. Some of the family sold their share and others stayed. So the property itself was kind of a combination of some old traditional buildings and some newer modern buildings. Anyway, when I was about 5 years old, I started waking up in the middle of the night, complaining to my mum that there was a girl in my room and she wouldn't let me sleep. My mum obviously presumed that I was just having nightmares, or that I'd been watching scary movies and was now facing the consequences. She did let me sleep in their room, but she was growing more and more concerned that I kept having the same nightmares. She says I always seemed more annoyed than scared, though as time went on, she started to question whether it really was just nightmares. For context, my mum is hugely skeptical and quite the level-headed person, though ghosts were never even considered as a possibility. For now, at least. My dad was a lot more open-minded. He was definitely a believer in the paranormal. This is because of all the things that he'd experienced and seen growing up in that house. He was the one insisting that there was something way more sinister at play here than just nightmares or scary movies. My parents had a pull-out couch in their bedroom and decided to let me sleep there until I felt ready to sleep back in my own room. However, every time I tried to sleep back in my room, the nightmares would persist, and inevitably, I'd always return to my parents' bedroom. My mum asked me what this girl looked like. I described her as a little bit older than me, with long dark hair that covered her face and a tatty white dress. I said that she would wake me up wanting to play with me, and if I refused, she'd become aggressive or expose her face to me, which I said looked like it was rotting. My mum thought that maybe my sister had made me watch The Ring with her, but I insisted that this girl was real. My sister absolutely denied ever letting me watch that movie. It kept on like this until one particular night when my mum was woken up by what sounded like a girl's voice in their bedroom. She says she looked over to where I was, and there I was fast asleep on that pull-out couch. Out of nowhere, a shadow passed over me, and I was being pulled up by the front of my shirt into an upright position. I woke up, terrified, screaming, with that girl's rotting face right in front of my own. My mum rushed over, scooping me up in her arms, and my dad was frantically yelling to wake up my grandma. It all pretty much stopped when my grandma called in a priest and started leaving rosaries and a figurine of the Virgin Mary under my pillow. It was all very horror movie-esque, but it was also far from the last weird thing ever to occur in that house. For years, My grandpa had been telling us that there was money buried under the house. It's a very common superstition in Mexico. Some say that only the person that's been shown where the money is in a dream can ever really attain it, while others say the person that finds the money will die. My grandpa was the one being constantly accosted by the spirit of a woman telling him where the money is. My mum used to tease him about having already lived long enough and that he should really start to consider his grandchildren's inheritance. My grandpa was always a really good sport about my mum's joking, but what he told us sounds genuinely terrifying. He said, like me, he was often woken up by something in the middle of the night. When he rolled over in bed, he would see something staring at him from out of the darkness. There were also times he complained about being pulled out of bed by an unseen force. He often dreamt about a woman offering to tell him where the money was, in exchange for 3 masses at a specific church. Sometimes she would offer him her hand, but it would always be covered and concealed by her dress. This gave my grandpa cause for concern. He did seem to oblige at first though, asking my grandma to go to church and request the first 2 masses. However, when she went to church to request the 3rd mass, the priest refused, unless my grandpa went to speak to him personally. My grandpa refused to go for some reason, so the 3rd mass never happened. He would also say that sometimes he could see a specific spot on the floor in the house glowing, but refused to say exactly where it was. Anytime I tell people these stories, they always seem to think that I'm just retelling horror stories, which I suppose is understandable. There are many, many more stories passed down from generations about that house, but these stories are the most personal ones to me. This is a really long story, but it's 100% true. Going back 25 years now, I moved in with my cousin and her co-worker/roommate, Jose. The house was an old cement block, 3-bedroom, 1 bathroom, with a large fenced yard. Jose had 2 very large German shepherds that lived there, but they were mostly kept in the yard. The house itself is in Claremont, Florida, in a shitty, packed suburban neighborhood. Nothing special whatsoever. But the rent was cheap, $50 a week from what I remember, and the house was clean and tidy. Plus, my cousin lived there too, so I moved in and we all got along really well. Everyone worked. We all had our own busy lives, so we pretty much kept ourselves to ourselves and saw each other for a few minutes here and there. I lived there very happily for around 6 months. However, the story I'm about to tell you was the reason for me moving out. I'm pretty sure you'll understand why. It was a weekend night, and we all happened to be off work at the same time. We decided to make an occasion of it and invite some of our friends around from the local pool hall that we frequented. Jose also invited a few people over from the pharmaceutical lab that he worked at. There was probably about 20 people there in total. We played music and did a lot of things that young people do. Eventually, it got pretty late, and we found ourselves talking about ghosts and the paranormal on a wider scale. My cousin and I are from a really spiritual family, so we both had some really interesting stories to tell. Everybody got involved, and we were all really into the discussion. Jose, however, remained quiet throughout most of the conversation. He waited until we'd all quietened down a little bit, and then he said, "This house is haunted." My cousin and I both shot each other a look, and then laughed, because yes, Jose's £20 cat sometimes meows at something in the hallway, but that's pretty much it. He proceeded to tell us that there was a presence in the house, but it mostly stayed in the backyard and in the shed in particular. This tiny, pink, little old wooden shed that I'd never even looked in. He told us that he always keeps the curtains in his bedroom closed. This is because his window faces that shed, and the door to the shed will never stay closed. He said he's jammed it shut a million times, but it will never stay shut. It really creeps him out. He said he could always tell when it was in the house, because he'd waken up feeling down and depressed. This really gave me the chills. I certainly didn't want to think that I was living with a presence, and I didn't like the idea that it was having a negative effect on my roommate. I was a tough chick, in my opinion, so I piped up and said, "Fuck that ghost. I'll shut that shed door, and you won't have to keep your curtains closed anymore." I said all this because I didn't genuinely believe that there was a ghost in the house or in that shed. I believed that we were all just fucking around. So I told them all that I was going outside to inspect that shed and shut the door once and for all. Everyone followed me as we were all walking around the outside of the house. Jose told me that this was a really bad idea and asked me to reconsider. He said that whatever it was really wanted that door open, and that I should just leave it alone. We all got to the shed, and it was exactly what I thought it would be. A very worn down wooden shed that looked oddly more like a house than it did a shed. I looked inside, and there was an old lawnmower, some old paint pots, some rusty screens, and darkness. Pure darkness. I looked around outside and found a rusty old shovel by the corner of the garage. I took the shovel over to the shed and kicked the door of the shed back into the frame. The door was closed, jammed shut, literally kicked back into the frame. The door itself was a really tight fit to the frame, so it took a considerable amount of force to get it back in. I took the handle of the shovel and placed it underneath the handle of the shed door. I shoved it into the ground as hard as I possibly could. It was secure. It wasn't budging at all. We all went back inside and bullshitted a little bit more, but it was very late. I'm going to say roughly 1 AM by the time we got back in, and everybody kind of started to say their goodbyes. We let the dogs out of their pen in the yard and locked the gate. We made sure the front gate was locked so they couldn't get out, straightened up the house, and eventually we all went to bed. Sometime around 6 AM, I woke up because I really needed to pee. I opened my bedroom door, but I was still very sleepy. As I opened my bedroom door, there was a really loud and awful sound, and it startled the hell out of me. It was like the sound of fingernails scraping on a blackboard. You know the sound. I opened the door all the way, and something fell through the doorway and hit me on the leg. I was still very much in a daze, so it took a few seconds for me to register exactly what had just fallen and hit me. But when I realised what it was, my blood ran cold. I can't even begin to put into words how I felt in that moment. It was the shovel. The very same shovel that I'd used to jam the door shut on that creepy old shed. The shovel had been standing against my bedroom door. There was a tiny pile of dirt where the tip had been sat against the tile floor of the hallway. I rushed through the house. I checked the side door, which was still locked, and I went out into the yard. Of course, the shed door was now wide open. I felt like all the blood had been drained from my body, and I couldn't breathe. I ran back into the house, locking the door behind me in a panic. I immediately started pounding on Jose and my cousin's bedroom doors. I was absolutely terrified, but also livid at the same time. I absolutely knew that one of them was behind this little prank. I know that whoever is listening to or reading this story wasn't there to see the reaction on their faces. But I can absolutely guarantee neither of them did it. Jose literally started to weep. He was begging me to tell him that I was lying. He also begged my cousin to admit that she had done it. When neither of us would take responsibility, he went out to the store to buy some religious candles, produced a rosary, and started to pray for whatever it was to leave us in peace. Or pray for me for being so damn stupid. My Spanish wasn't even close to being fluent enough to keep up with his prayers. My cousin, on the other hand, was pissed. Really pissed. She was practically ready to fight me. She was absolutely adamant that I was pulling a prank and cussed me up and down. She called me a liar and said that I was just a child. But most of all, she said she really didn't appreciate being woken up at 6 AM in the morning after a night of partying to be a pawn in my stupid little prank. When I realised that neither of them had put that shovel against my bedroom door or reopened the shed door, I was absolutely terrified. There was no way on earth someone had gotten into the yard, past the dogs, got the shed door open, got into the locked house, and placed that shovel against my door. I didn't sleep there again without someone else in the room with me. Every moment I spent in that house after this was beyond tense. We all kind of stopped talking to each other, and Jose and my cousin ended up in a terrible argument. Jose's bedroom backs directly onto my cousin's bedroom wall, and he accused her of banging on the wall at all hours, a claim she strongly denies. My cousin ended up finding somewhere else to live, and was out of there within a week. It took me 2 weeks to find another place to live, and I've never been back since. But you might have guessed. Until the day I moved out of that house, Jose was still complaining about banging on the bedroom wall. The really creepy thing is, my cousin's bedroom door has remained locked since she moved out. Today, I want to share a story that changed me from a skeptic to a believer in the paranormal. This may be a long one, so please bear with me. I want to take you back to 2009. Our family had been looking for a new house for a while now, and near a busy highway stood this beautiful house. 2 stories, a spacious front and backyard, 3 bedrooms, etc. We fell in love with this house, so my parents placed an offer which was accepted, and we moved in soon after. As I already said, I didn't believe in ghosts before moving to this house. I was young and had never had any paranormal experiences up until this point. However, there were some strange occurrences relatively early on. For example, our family computer liked to turn on when nobody was around, and the water in the bath would start running on its own. However, the real horror began when my oldest sister decided to create a makeshift Ouija board. Essentially, she drew one herself on a piece of paper and used a glass to communicate. My younger sister got really scared when she realised what was happening, and she kicked the paper away. Well, soon after this, everything got worse. A lot worse. My sisters shared the biggest bedroom, and at the end of the bedroom was a little closet where they kept boxes, games, toys and things like that. Initially, the door to the closet was always closed, but after a while, it started opening on its own, and before long, it simply refused to stay shut. No matter what, that closet door just kept opening on its own. Eventually, my dad got really annoyed with it, so he placed something in between the door and the wall to stop the door from opening. One night, when everyone was in their beds, I heard what sounded like chairs downstairs moving and scraping across the kitchen floor. I was the last one to leave the living room and go upstairs to bed that night, so I knew for absolute certain there was nobody down there. Everybody else was already in bed. I listened intently until the sounds of the scraping chairs stopped. Not long after that, I started hearing this really awful sound. It was as if something was inside the walls and underneath the flooring, tearing everything apart. It was incredibly loud. I remember hiding under my blanket, absolutely terrified. The next morning, when I woke up and went downstairs for breakfast, my mum asked me why I'd stacked all the chairs on top of each other in the kitchen. Obviously, I said that I hadn't, and the expression on my mum's face looked fearful. I could tell straight away that she believed me. Another time, we were all in the living room watching our favourite TV show, sitting on the couch with the dog next to us. My mum had some small collectible figurines on the table. Suddenly, one of the figurines launched itself across the room, as if somebody had thrown it. My mum jokingly said, "Hey, no need to get so aggressive." She was trying her best to make light of the situation so that me and my sisters wouldn't get scared. But there was no hiding it. There was fear in her tone, and I could sense it. One morning, my sister ran into my parents' bedroom screaming hysterically. She said that she was in the kitchen at the table eating breakfast on her own, and the chair next to her at the table pulled itself out from underneath the table on its own. Our dog started behaving way more aggressively in certain rooms in the house. She would stand staring at the sofa, growling and barking as if somebody was sitting there. She especially hated the basement and wouldn't go anywhere near the basement door. One night, I was woken up by the sound of my mum screaming. I ran as fast as I could into their bedroom to find out what was going on. My mum was sat upright in bed, and my dad was still lying down next to her. I asked what was wrong. She just said, "It was nothing, honey, just a bad dream. Go back to bed." She later confessed that this wasn't the case at all. My mum had been woken up that night by the sound of whispering in her ear. When she opened her eyes, there was a black figure standing next to her bed. She couldn't really describe it. She just said that it was like a black shadow, but it was standing there right next to her. We started hearing what sounded like somebody playing a violin down in the basement. None of us owned any musical instruments, and we definitely didn't know how to play the violin. We thought maybe there was a music player hidden down there or something. It became a real nuisance, so we searched the basement from top to bottom, but we could never find the source. I remember one day I walked into my bedroom and placed my coins on my bedside table. As I turned to leave the room, I heard a clang. One of the coins had somehow been hurled towards me. Just one of the coins. I had left them in a perfect, neat stack on top of that table. Gradually, the activity in the house seemed to become more and more focused around my youngest sister. One day, she was playing in her room with her cuddly toys. My mum walked into her bedroom to put some washing away in the chest of drawers. The cuddly toys were scattered all across the bedroom floor. My mum was talking to my sister, who followed her back out of the room into the laundry room to help her with the clothes. When they returned to my sister's bedroom just a few minutes later, the cuddly toys were now arranged in a perfect circle on the bedroom floor. My mum was absolutely horrified, but my sister seemed surprisingly unfazed. In winter 2010, everything came to a climax, and my parents had no choice but to put the property up for sale. My little sister started waking up each and every morning with small scratches on her face. Initially, we all presumed that maybe she was just doing it to herself in her sleep. However, we soon realised that this wasn't the case, because she started waking up with scratches on her back, in places that she just couldn't reach. My mum would bath my sister on the evening, and by the morning the scratches would appear. Enough was enough. We received an offer on the house fairly quickly, and thankfully the sale of the house went through quickly with no problems. We moved out of that house and never looked back. We have had no paranormal encounters or experiences since moving out of that house. Thank you for listening. That wraps things up for today. I really hope those stories give you nightmares. As always, leave your thoughts in the comments section. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for a feast of grim and grisly content. Thanks for watching. I'm your host, Severed Soul.